when you tell people that you're studying engineering and you look like how I look, people are like, oh my goodness, you must be so smart. Like you must be brilliant, like brilliant. I could never do that. And on the surface, that's a really positive response. Like it's very affirming, it's very encouraging. But underneath that lies this idea that to be a woman who makes it in engineering, you have to be different from other women. And you have to be kind of almost alien in your level of intelligence or drive or ambition that somehow makes you like more masculine or more set apart from other women. And that's why you can succeed in it. And I've actually had this conversation with Louise of like, it's actually a very frustrating response because I'm not smarter than other women. I'm just someone who feels very passionate about this. And kind of having this idea that the few women who make it in engineering are super special, I think is really dangerous because it sets up this idea that you have to be super special to even try. And I think for girls who are getting, you know, C's and B's in their classes or are sitting around that 75, 80% mark, they feel like they're kind of subpar and they don't even want to try because of this idea that you have to be brilliant and you have to be like you have to be even better than the guys in order to be able to make it. So I think having just like representation and exposure and a place for us to go like this is what we're doing and we're navigating it and this is how we figured it out is really important because unless you're sharing those stories, the culture around it is the main message. Oh, I have to be good enough to make the cut. Like I have to work so much harder. I have to be so much better in order to make that 14%, rather than thinking I might get 80 on my exams, but I care so much about design and I'm really interested in calculus. I'm just going to give it a crack. So I think it like sets this idea of you like yeah, you have to be elite and you have to be better than other people. And I think it tokenism is part of it, but there's a lot more there than I think people give thought to.
Yeah, I just want to set tokenism aside really because it's not,
Mm,
I don't know how related it is. I mean, I think a lot of times it's people who are, with the best of intentions, you know,
totally.
but in this case, it's, I think what you're saying is that there's this whole pool of potential engineers who don't even go through that door. And these are doors that
Yeah.
you're trying to open. And you've identified something that kind of closes doors, which is the perception that only the most remarkable or somehow different
Yeah.
young women are the ones who should go into engineering. And then what happens is that if they never go through the door, then they never find that, the Jeremy Smith or the humanitarian
Yeah.
or this ministry that you found. Like they never find those things because they never went through the
Mm,
door in the first place.
totally. That's why broadening engineering as a discipline just inherently makes it easier because you're opening more doors. And
Yeah.
that's not even just with humanitarian engineering, that's with a lot of things like biomedical or like aeronautical. Like the more doors there are, the more diversity of people that you're going to let through. I was getting a dress for the engineers ball and I started talking to the shop assistant. She's like, "Oh, what are you studying?" And I said engineering and the same thing, like jaw hitting the floor of like, "Oh my goodness, I'm so in awe of you. I could never do that." And for me, I'm like, I'm just trying to buy a dress. I'm just having like a feminine moment here. And now there's this gap between us because you're looking up at me and going, "Oh my goodness, she must be like this hidden figures powerhouse of a boss lady." If people heard about what I was doing in Uganda and had that response, I would be flattered and honored. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And then there's another little thread that I just want to pull. When you say, well, if you're at 75%, 80%, don't count yourself out.
Mm,
You're not saying that you were a mediocre student and then you came to ANU and it was okay for you to, not not have the aptitude or whatever. It's not like we're removing excellence from the equation.
No, and I wouldn't want that to be a misconception that
Right.
gets taken away from this conversation,
Yeah.
because engineering is a difficult and challenging profession, and it should demand a standard of excellence. And I did work really hard and I got very good marks in school, and my ATAR was 20 points higher than the next person down in my year group. And I was an outlier, and I'm very proud of that. But I think what I'm getting at is that we can broaden our definition of excellence, and that if we narrow it down to 95 and above on paper, you miss out on a lot of people who are actually very good at engineering and have the capacity to be very creative and very design oriented and very technical, that would bring a lot to the profession, but don't get 95 and above on paper. And so it's not necessarily about disqualifying excellence, it's about broadening our perception of excellence to meet the broadening needs of the engineering profession.
Mhm.
Because realistically, if we're looking at the upcoming fields of humanitarian engineering, it's not a calculus heavy course. I'm not sitting around all day deriving equations of curves. Like, I'm good at maths, but that's not what I spend my day doing. I've spent my days, like last week, in big old hiking boots, trekking around a 16-acre site in Uganda, digging holes and looking at soil content and thinking about, okay, like, how much water is this community going to need, and where can I get it from, and is it good enough quality, and how am I going to filter it, and how am I going to store it? And if I'm pumping it, is it a solar pump? And how can I design the solar? Like, that's not something that you need a 95 in calculus for. That's something that you need a really creative relational problem solving skill set for. And that's not something that you get graded on at school.
Interesting. Is there something that you can say about the Uganda experience now that you've done it and come back, that
Yeah.
what wouldn't have been included in the application for Natasha Leonard?
Oh, that's such a good question. Um, it's a hard question because I'm still processing it.
Hmm.
I think from, oh, that's such a good question. Um, to distill it, I think so much more cultural training is needed for engineers who are going into those kinds of contexts. I think, I mean, this is the first time that I worked in a developing country. It's the first time I traveled to Africa. And so I knew a lot of things in here, but it doesn't get into here until you actually see it. And it's working cross-culturally is incredibly demanding, and not just in a technical way. Um, but also the way, the kinds of design skills that it's required, like that it requires to work in those contexts, are not the kind of ones that we're learning in school. Like, I might learn how to build a state-of-the-art water system at ANU, but in rural Uganda, that would break down in 18 months and no one in the region would know how to fix it. And so you have this idea of like all of these great big Western ideas of how things should be designed, but you really have to change your design principles to fit the context that you're working in. And I do not think that's something that is being taught at all, really. Even within the HumEng program, it could be taught better, because realistically, we have this idea, and I think this is one of the dangers of humanitarian engineering if it's not stewarded well, is that I'm I'm the super compassionate Western engineer who's going to come in and fix the problem, and that it's the white savior complex, and it doesn't work. And it's not the right way of doing things, design wise or ethically. And so you really have to have a much broader design skill set and a much broader perspective to be able to like work in those contexts.
Is it okay though if what motivated you in the first place was a little bit of that? I've been fortunate. Um, I've had doors open for me, and I want to give back to humanity.
Totally, totally. I think yes. I think though the difference between whether that turns out well and whether it goes south is humility. Because if you can come into that with, I'm so fortunate, I want to give back, but I also want to learn from the community and I want to serve rather than I want to fix and I want to just like channel knowledge into this place. That's the key because in Uganda, I learned design things that I would not have learned at ANU from locals, like local design professionals and local people. And so if you go in with that humility, that's the game changer.